Well, in addition to being a predictably solid Tom Hanks drama, does Finch have anything worthwhile to say? Well, stick around and hear my thoughts. I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of Finch on Apple TV+. The synopsis on IMDb reads, on a post-apocalyptic Earth, a robot built to protect the life of his creator's beloved dog learns about life, love, friendship, and what it means to be human. All right, so what is this thing? Well, it starts out like a solo character drama, a little bit like Castaway, oddly enough. It's about Finch and his lonely existence and his efforts to survive all by himself, accompanied only by his dog. But it slowly shifts into a movie that's more and more about like Pinocchio becoming a real boy, that kind of thing. The robot starts out as feeling very artificial, but the voice performance changes gradually and becomes more and more human over time. And he has other behaviors that, despite starting out sounding like a speak and spell, very early on he has behaviors that clearly show signs of personhood. And I don't think we're intended to, as is almost never the case, I feel like we're not intended to think of him as merely a great simulation, just a simulation that's so strong, a simulation of humanity, personhood, that's so strong that we're fooled by it. No, I think we're meant, like is almost always the case in these kinds of stories, to accept it as, yes, he is becoming human, or he is becoming a person. And this happens without explanation, which is, pretty standard for stories about AI becoming persons. The movie doesn't even memorably, though, establish Finch as some kind of AI genius. I feel like oftentimes, or at least in movies that I can connect with and roll with, I guess, a little bit more that are about this subject, if they prop up somebody as being like really good, if they say something about the AI technology and where it's at, and like, oh, we're really close, and provide some kind of a story conceit, then I guess I can roll with it a little bit more. But this guy, he worked for a technology company, but it's not established that he was some kind of like really AI-focused scientist or engineer, and he even seems surprised when the robot becomes more human-like, since he created him merely to take care of his dog. So conceptually, for me, there are some important pieces missing for me to accept the robot as becoming a person, and that's even setting aside my philosophical problems with the idea, which I'll get into a little bit later. But it's still interesting. I was in it for the character Finch, played by Tom Hanks, and the more his story was focused on, the more I was invested. But when the movie increasingly became about the robot becoming human, I lost attachment to the drama in all of those situations. And it is a sci-fi drama, no question. There are a few suspenseful moments related to Finch trying to survive by himself in this harsh world, but it's mostly this quiet movie focused on Finch and the robot as characters. And so you really, I think, need to be in it for that kind of experience, or you're going to be disappointed or find it boring or whatever. Tom Hanks really carried this movie well for me, and as well for me here as I think he did in Castaway. I like the story of Castaway more than this for sure, but I mean, he still carries it really well all by himself, virtually. He doesn't set a new bar for himself, but I mean, he's still great. There's nothing wrong with him not setting a new bar when he's already great. So I really appreciated what he brought to this movie. As far as the visuals go, I have to say the robot was very impressive looking in terms of how realistic it looked. I assume there's a mix of both CGI and practical effects going on here, but I don't know, and I love that I don't know. I love that CG has arrived at this point. I'm assuming that CG was a significant part of how they pulled this off. I love that CG has arrived at this point where now, when it's representing machine life, it can, to my cursed eye that normally picks out CG, it can be indistinguishable to me in this much throughout the movie. I think there was maybe just one moment where the robot was moving in a way, and it almost always comes down to movement of CGI things. He moved in a way that is like, that gives me a CGI vibe, But I mean, otherwise, it was indistinguishable. I was like, yeah, I have no idea if this is if I'm looking at a practical prop robot puppet type thing, or CGI, or some combination of both. And so now at this point, I'm just kind of waiting for CG that represents organic life to be indistinguishable from real actors or real creatures, because this has come about as far as I could want it to in terms of visual realism when recreating artificial objects and machines and stuff like that. So as far as themes, I always ask myself when I'm taking in entertainment, is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in the themes of this thing that might trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation that's worth bringing up? This movie acknowledges human depravity, which I feel like is being represented more and more in fiction. It used to be a couple decades ago that the mantra from Hollywood was, people are basically good, Well, then we got Twitter and Facebook, and the people that might have been saying that before were like, oh, people actually suck. And so I think this kind of sad realization or representation of the reality of humanity's brokenness and sin and evil in fiction, even as humans are still often recognized as valuable and having wonderful aspects to them as well. I think we're seeing much more fairly the dark and evil side of humanity being represented in movies. And that's certainly the case here, but at the same time, it also subtly suggests that human relationships are valuable, or at least relationships with dogs and robots. I don't know if it actually goes so far as to really truly affirm the value of human relationships. The dramatic kind of like emphasis, or the dramatic, I don't know, let me abort that sentence and try something different. What they ask you to invest in, I think, what you're expected to invest in is his relationship with the dog and the robot. Not really. I mean, I could look at the. They're saying that it's kind of sad that he never really connected to other humans and has had trouble doing that. Maybe there's something sad about that, or maybe that's just something I'm bringing to it because of my worldview. I don't know. As I said before, like many robot becomes a real boy stories, this movie assumes without explanation for how that machines can and will eventually gain personhood, just kind of like on their own. They get complex enough that at some point they start taking on human idiosyncrasies, like bobbing up and down in excitement. And I'm like, well, that seems to be a manifestation that's related to, yes, who we are on a mental level, and maybe if you believe as I do in the non-tangible essential part of being human, it's probably a mix of that and maybe something about how our nervous system is designed. But why would this robot that was merely designed to take care of this dog exhibit that kind of behavior? Well, you could say it's a dramatic conceit. They just want us to, be emotionally attached to this robot. But I mean, still, from a pure hard sci-fi perspective, I have issues with that because I don't understand that. And then also just that it would magically become a person, as we are really expected to think and feel about the robot characters. So I do really get hung up on that when fiction does it, because it reminds me of how influential naturalism has become, and how there's this assumption that ultimately what we are as humans is purely physical and ultimately can be replicated in its entirety in some other form of thing that we create. That's what in order to value human or machine life to the same degree that you do human life, then I think you have to say that human life we are merely wet machines, and I'm also just reminded about how human life in general is decreasingly valued by a lot of people today, and so I'm not sure what an intended theme or message of Finch might be. I feel like they're going for something. Is the robot symbolic of a child that Finch is passing on knowledge to, or is the robot representative of kind of a second chance for Finch to invest in relationships in his life? No. Instead, for me, the sad thought that came to my mind while watching this movie is how, like Finch, we've all been hurt by people to various degrees. Some of us way more than others, and we can come to and isolate ourselves from them, and in the process accept these other substitutes that fill our lives that we give time and energy to instead, telling ourselves that they have more value than they actually do. Substitutes like entertainment or exclusively online interactions that we can control, and they're more safe for us, and we can kind of keep them at arm's length. And in accepting or pursuing those substitutes, yes, we avoid some pain, but we also miss out on truly loving and being loved the way we're meant to, and living out the purpose that God made us for. Anyway, I have no idea what your tastes are in movies, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter, you can probably skip this one. If you do watch it, you're going to find it interesting. And there'll be a few moments that you emotionally connect with, and the visual effects are certainly impressive, but you're going to be interested primarily on a meta level as you watch this movie, not really being emotionally invested in the story and characters themselves, as is almost certainly intended by the filmmakers. This one's rated PG-13 for brief, violent images, and those are all my thoughts for now on Finch. I'd love to get your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, and click that bell as well to stay connected. I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making so much of my content possible. You can get info about the benefits of being an insider at patreon.com/Spiritblade Productions. And then I hope you'll check out our podcast and stay connected to all CGC content over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.
Do you believe in the supernatural?
Download the Legacy Edition of Spirit Blade, a full past audio drama, for free at spiritblade.com.